Hi everyone, welcome, fantastic. Hi everyone, welcome to MoAD Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House. My name's Tess and this is Romy.
Hi guys.
And we're really excited to have you today for our special digital program called Breaking Through. Today we're going to be looking at some amazing women who worked in Parliament and paved the way for others to follow. So, we'll be with us for about 30 or so minutes and we'll look at some different places in the building and explore some of those fantastic stories. We've got about 200 or so students joining us today, which is really exciting. So we'll talk you through as we go. Guys, before we start any program, we also do like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're standing on, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri, and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So I think we should get stuck in and explore some of those stories. So I might see you later, guys. I'll leave you with Romy. Bye.
See you later, Tess. Exactly right. Now, we are going to be looking at women in Parliament today. And some of these women you may have actually heard about before. You may have studied them at school. You may have heard your parents or guardians talking about them. You may have even heard them on the news. So they might be some familiar names to you. But we are actually going to first head all the way back to 1901, when Australia federated, when we became a nation. Now, we're going to have some true or false questions in our program here today. So the first one is right now. If you think the answer is true, thumbs up. If you think the answer is false, thumbs down. So is it true or false that this building, the one behind me, was the home of Australia's federal parliament when Australia federated in 1901? Is it true or is it false? What are we thinking? So seeing some people thinking it's true, some people thinking it's false. Oh, I can see a little bit more falses, and you guys are exactly right. It is false. This building was not the home of our federal parliament in 1901. When Australia federated, when all the 6 colonies came together in 1901, Canberra, the ACT, did not exist. And so our federal parliament met for the very first time in the exhibition building in Melbourne in 1901. You can see here a painting of that very first meeting of all of the politicians listening very carefully to what was being read out. And it was only in 1909 that the official location of the ACT, our nation's capital, was decided. And you can see it there on the map. Even during this time, our federal parliament still was in Melbourne, and it was in Melbourne from 1901 up until 1927, when this building that I'm in front of finally opened and our federal parliament moved to our nation's capital in Canberra. Now, this building was our Parliament House from 1927 all the way up until 1988, 61 years, when we made our very last jump just a couple of meters up behind us, up the hill, to our Australian Parliament House, where our current Parliament still sits today. Now, we're going to be going and through this building in a moment, learning some stories of some of the people, specifically some of the women who were involved in our federal Parliament. Not all of them worked in this building, but they all had a really important role in our federal Parliament. Now, you guys are going to lead the way, and Tess is going to meet you in our very first stop. So we're walking across the road and up the stairs heading into this amazing building. Now, important things didn't just happen inside the building. A lot of important things happened outside the building and even on these steps as well. But we'll hear a little bit more about some of those events later on. Now, Jim's going to get the door for us, so make sure you say big thank you to Jim as we go past. Thanks, Jim. We're heading on up these stairs into the very heart of our building here. And Tess is going to tell us a little bit more about this space when we see her next.
That's right. Thanks again, guys. Excuse me. So here we are in King's Hall, and it's named King's Hall because here we have a statue of King George V, and he was King of Great Britain when this building opened in 1927. He's also the current Queen's grandfather, so there's a connection there. Okay, there's lots of connections to Great Britain that we do have here in our Old Parliament House, and Romy and I will be talking about them later on as well. But before we do talk about that, I'd like to mention the first story that we have. 1943, 2 very special women came here on their first day of work. But before we do talk about that, I do have one fact for you. Guys, in 1901, when Australia was federated, women were not allowed to vote or stand for election in federal parliament. Lucky this change with the Commonwealth Franchise Act of 1902 taking place. It is important to note, though, that a group of individuals were excluded. And it wasn't until 1962 that within the Act, Aboriginal natives, as they were known, did get that right to vote. So it did take a little bit longer, unfortunately. Now, in the 1903 election, 4 women did stand for election. Unfortunately, they weren't successful, but they did help pave the way for others to try. Now, I mentioned before, those 2 important women, their names were Dorothy Tagney and Dame Enid Lyons. And they started their very first day in 1945 in August, walking up the first steps there. So you can see them there on the left-hand side. We've got Dorothy Tagney, and right-hand side, Dame Enid Lyons. So very important event there. Now, we are going to go to one of our first chambers, and we're going to meet Romy there. And she's going to talk to you a little bit more about Dorothy and the chambers, a bit of background as well. So let's head over there. I'll talk you through it on the way through. Let's go. So heading across King's Hall, we're going to talk about Dorothy, guys. And she was 36 years of age when she started in Parliament. And she was here for an amazing 25 years. So we'll hear from Romy in a moment.
That's right, guys. Welcome to one of our chambers. Now, I'm wondering, do you guys know what the name of this chamber is? Does anyone know what the name of this chamber is? Richmond, can you be a bit louder for me? The Senate, exactly right. Now, it's a really, really easy way to tell that this is the Senate because of the colour. What colour is this room? Red. It's red, exactly right. It is red. Now, this room is red, but we didn't think up this red. We weren't that clever back in 1927. We copied this red from another country whose version of this chamber was exactly this colour. We copied this colour from Great Britain and from their House of Lords. Same goes for the colour in the other chamber, but I think Tess will talk to you a bit more about that one in a moment. But in here, we're going to talk a little bit about Dorothy Tagney. And just like Tess said, she was the very first woman ever elected to work in this chamber. So imagine being the only woman, 36 other senators in this space, and not all of them are men. You are the only woman. That would have been quite overwhelming for her. But she was said to be quite spirited and modern for her time. She was quoted as being a born politician who just so happens to be a woman. But she actually came from quite humble beginnings. She had quite a poor family. She worked as a school teacher before entering politics, and that gave her a great sense of social justice. And so while she was in the Senate, she fought for things like education, social services, medical assistance, and housing. Now, we actually are really lucky. In our archives, we have audio of one of the very first speeches that she gave from September 1943. And we're going to play that, and we're going to have a little bit of a listen to what she says. And while we're listening to that, we're going to bring up a picture of Dorothy at her desk in her office, and we're going to hear this speech being given when she's in this chamber. So have a bit of a listen and see if you can hear the determination in her voice.
I also realize my great honor in being the first woman to be elected to the Senate. But it is not as a woman that I have been elected to this chamber. It is as a citizen of the Commonwealth. And I take my place here with the full privileges and rights of all honourable senators.
Yeah, wow, you could definitely hear how passionate she was about her job. Now, we're actually going to bring you up a picture now of another very special object that we have in our collection regarding Dorothy. But this one's a bit strange. It's an axe. And she had this axe in her office, but it's not a normal axe. It's actually an axe that's made up of what is left of a bottle that she used to launch a ship in Maryborough in Queensland in 1944. Now, if you read the label, it actually says to be used as and when required. So that would have been quite an intimidating object to see when you're walking into this great lady's office. Now, politics had to change when women entered this space and entered the work that was being done here in Parliament. But we're going to be heading over into another space now, which is a bit of a strange place, but it gives us a really good idea of how unprepared not just the men who worked here were for when women entered Parliament in 1943, but also how the building was unprepared for women like Enid and Dorothy to arrive. But Tess is going to tell you a bit more about that when you get there. So you lead the way and she'll meet you there. So we are heading out the side door here and we're staying on the Senate side. You can tell that because the carpet is still red. It's a really good indicator of where you are in the building, is the color of the carpet. But we're going to meet Tess up here in this very strange spot.
That's right, here we are in front of the ladies' toilets. You might be thinking, Tess, why have you taken me to the ladies' toilets? But it does tell a very great story. Now, when Enid Lyons and Dorothy Tagney started here on the first day in 1943, there were no dedicated female toilets for them to use. It's pretty surprising, though, that women had been running for Parliament since 1902 and they hadn't thought of facilities for them to use. Now, women elected equally to men in the same way, you'd think they would have thought of that, but unfortunately they didn't. In 1974, that did change, and these bathrooms behind me, which were male bathrooms, were turned into women's bathrooms. Don't get me wrong, Dorothy and Enid did have facilities to use, luckily, but they were used by junior staff and serving staff, and there were no dedicated female toilets for parliamentarians. So finally, it did change in 1974. You can see a photo here, just next to me, of a urinal. It's actually boxed up. So the male toilets were changed into ladies' toilets here, just behind the Senate for senators to use. Okay, so from this very interesting space, we're heading back to the Senate to talk about a very inspiring woman who broke through what was previously a man's role, a man's job. So finally, we've got a woman, another first, into this position, and we'll meet Mommy there. Let's go. Yep, so we're heading down the Senate side, still red. And in a moment, you'll see a few special chairs, and Romy might ask you a few questions about those chairs when she gets there.
That is right, Tess. So guys, welcome back to the Senate. Now, we're up at a different part of this room now. We're a little bit closer to the front of it, up near some of these really amazing chairs. And we're going to talk in particular about who sits in this one at the very back. Now, I'm wondering, does anyone have an idea about who gets to sit in that chair at the very back of the room? There's actually a clue on the top of it that tells us a little bit about who that person might be. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? If anyone from Richmond has a thought, if a teacher might like to let us know? Oh, we're hearing some prime ministers, not quite, but I heard a couple of people say the Queen, and that's exactly right. Our head of state is the person who gets to sit in that chair. And here in Australia, the head of state is the monarch, and that person at the moment is Queen Elizabeth II. Now, we actually have a picture of her sitting in this exact chair back in 1954 when she came and visited. She'd only been queen for 1 year when this photo was taken, but she has actually sat in that chair 2 times after that when she has visited Australia, and it's coincided with the opening of Parliament. But it's been quite a few years since the Queen has opened a Parliament here in Australia, because she lives a very, very long way away, and it's a bit difficult for her to come here every time we need her for something. So there is someone else who does the Queen's job for her when she's not here. Now, I'm wondering whether some of our older students might know the name of this particular person. It's not the Queen, but it is someone else who gets to do the same job.
The Governor General?
Yeah, the Governor General, exactly right. So the Governor General is the only other person who is allowed to sit in that chair at the back. Now, we have had only one Governor General who has been a woman, the very first woman to hold that position. We've got a picture of her here for you. Her name is Dame Quentin Bryce. Now, she was sworn in as Governor General on the 5th of September 2008 and was incredibly qualified for the role. She had over 40 years' experience as an academic, as a lawyer, as a human rights, women's, and community advocate, as well as being a university college professor. So she is still the most awarded woman in the public service in Australia. Now, she held the office of the Governor General up until 2014, but during her time in that role, she was able to participate in a really amazing event in this country, and it was the swearing in of our very first female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Now, you can see here Dame Quentin Bryce on the right, in her yellow coat, swearing in Julia Gillard on the left. Now, we're going to have a bit of a conversation now about an object that we can see in that picture, aren't we, Tess?
Yeah, that's right, guys. Thanks so much, Romy. So if you had a look at that photo beforehand, she's wearing a few very interesting items. A beautiful yellow coat, jacket, and also a corsage, also known as a brooch, if you didn't pick that one up. Now, these items are special to her because the brooch was actually given to her by her grandmother, and she was a suffragette, which gives you a little bit of a clue there. I'd like to bring a photo of that brooch up again, and let's have a really close look at it. We've got the three main colours, purple, green, and white, three main colours of the suffragette movement there. Okay, I think it's time for our next true or false question, guys. So, thinking about those colours, but white in particular. The colour white in this corsage means purity. True or false, guys? Means purity. True or false? Yeah, you got it. Well done, guys. You're on the money. It is true, and that's right. Now, all those colours are very significant that I mentioned. White, purity. Green, hope or spring. And purple, the blood of women fighting for their right to vote. So very emotive colours, very strong meaning behind that brooch there. Okay. We also have a very special quote from a historian who worked at Old Parliament House. Her name's Libby Stewart, and she interviewed Dame Quentin Bryce, and we've got that quote now. The colour purple is very symbolic for me, as it is for many women. I think of purple as being the symbol of equality for women, the justice and for women's movement, which is very much in the tradition of this country. Fantastic. I love that quote. It's really powerful. And if we think about what she's wearing, it tells us a lot about her passions and the causes that she really cares about. So she cared about the idea of women's issues and raising awareness. So wearing those beliefs on your clothing is a very powerful way to do that, to get your ideas across. Okay, we're going to head to the House of Representatives next, guys, and we're going to talk about another special woman who worked there. So I think you can lead the way and we'll chat as we go. Let's go. Okay, so heading out of the Senate this time, a few steps there. Watch your step as you go up. We also have to wait for our visitors to go past before we can head back into King's Hall. And guys, you might see a few features that you can only find in the House of Representatives. We'll talk about that in a moment. Oh, I can see green. That's a huge clue. Here we are again. Okay, so we're in the House of Representatives and it's green, a massive clue, only be found here. Guys, there's a very interesting shiny object behind me that can also only be found in the House of Representatives. Students, if you know it, yell it out. What's this thing called behind me? The mace. Beautiful, that's right, well done. And you can see there's a few symbols on the mace. The crown here is pointing towards this side of the chamber, which represents the government. And you can see the opposition on this side here. Now, we haven't spoken about the chair at the back. Guys, the Speaker's chair. You might have learnt about the Speaker. They have a very, very important role in Parliament. They make sure that all the members in the House of Representatives have a chance to speak and they get their turn, but it can be a very hard job and very, very noisy job. Now, in a moment, we're going to meet our first female speaker in the House of Representatives. You might know her name, but here she is, a beautiful illustration of her. Let's meet Madam Joan Child. Now, her life experience, she said, really helped her become a better speaker. She was a widow, unfortunately, and raised 5 boys on her own, on a pension. She worked in retail, as a cook, as a cleaner, You can imagine how hard all those jobs were, and that really prepared her for the job of speaker. Very difficult role indeed. We've also got some fantastic audio from that era, so we can hear the voice of Joan Child herself, and we can hear how hard it was in the chamber controlling the members. So I'd like you to have a listen out, see what she's saying, and think about if you could do that job. Let's listen now.
The Honourable Treasurer resume his seat, please. The Honourable Member for Bradfield on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, I'm prepared to debate anywhere at any time with the Treasurer on this
The Honourable
package.
Member will resume his
He knows
seat.
as well as
The
I
Honourable
do,
Member is
I can
not
come
putting
in here
forward a
and
point
you
of
can
order.
take the protection.
Order! The Honourable Member will resume his seat. He's totally out of order. Not only totally out of order, but knew he was out of order.
Oh gosh, that was a bit loud there, wasn't it? Sorry, students. But she had to be loud. It was a job. She had to call for order and make sure everyone had a turn. Now, I've got a great quote also from Gillard, which I'd like to read out as well. She said that at first some of the men tried to take me on, but most never tried again. So she was a very tough lady indeed, a very hard worker. She was actually the last to sit here in the House of Representatives, the last speaker, and the first to sit up in the hill in Australian Parliament House. Okay, from strong women here in the House of Representatives, we're going to head to a place next where not all members of Parliament are allowed access. It's a very special place, and Romy will tell you a bit more about who worked there and what their roles were. Let's go. So heading out of the House of Representatives, you can see it's still green, the carpet, so we're still on the House of Representatives side. Some security guards there. That might give you a clue how special this room is. Some lovely wood panelling from the 1970s. Heading into a room now. Let's go.
All right, guys. Yes, welcome to the Cabinet Room. Now, you guys have been really good listening to us, being very respectful, but I think we need to all stand up and have a bit of a wiggle, a bit of a shake, get everyone's kind of falling asleep limbs. Yeah, if you're too cool to stand up, you can. Yep. All right. Lovely. So it's actually very good that you're standing up, because you're going to help us out with this next true or false question. We're in the Cabinet Room right now, and people who worked in the Cabinet Room were called Cabinet Ministers. But is it true or false that Cabinet Ministers were people who were in charge of the Prime Minister's filing? Was it their job to look after all the Prime Minister's papers? Is that true or false? Oh, I can see a couple of thumbs up, a couple of thumbs down. That's false, guys. That is not true. That's false. All right, take a seat down for me, everyone. Awesome job. So, in the Cabinet Room, this would be where very special ministers would come and have very secret discussions. There's a bit of a clue as we came in. You might have seen the door is really, really thick. And that's because this whole room is actually soundproof. So it just gives us another idea of how secret the discussions were that happened in this space. And if you were a cabinet minister, you were assigned a very special portfolio or job, and you would come in here and discuss with the other cabinet ministers things of national importance and any national problems that we might be having, and try and figure out ways to solve them. So much more important jobs than just some filing. But we are going to now talk about one of the very first woman to ever become a member of the cabinet. And Tess has actually already mentioned her before. Her name was Dame Enid Lyons, and she was the very first woman ever elected to the House of Representatives back in 1943. But did you know that she actually had 12 children? And we've got a picture of her here with all of her children, as well as her husband there. And her husband was former Prime Minister Sir Joseph Lyons. So a very political family. You can see Dame Enid in the bottom left-hand corner and Sir Joseph on the bottom right-hand corner. But unfortunately, Sir Joseph Lyons was one of the Australian Prime Ministers that we've had who passed away while they were in office. But it was only 4 years after she lost her husband that Dame Enid herself was elected to the House of Representatives. Now, we have a quote that Damien had said about her time in Parliament. She said that she believed with all her heart in the right of women to a place in government. All my active public work had been aimed at rousing women a sense of their own powers and responsibilities. Wow, what emphatic language she's using, how passionate she is about her job in Parliament. Now, she was the very first woman to ever be elected to Parliament, to sit in the House of Representatives, and the very first woman to be chosen to become a cabinet minister, both really amazing, important positions. And by her doing that, she paved the way for other women to be able to come into these environments and be taken seriously, that they could do a good job in them. And she did that because since Enid came into this space as a cabinet minister, over 20 women have come in as cabinet ministers as well. So that's an amazing achievement. Now, one of her colleagues spoke incredibly highly of her and said that she knew the political game and could play it well. But she was also someone that you could go into their office and sit down and have a cup of tea with. So she was very good at her job and a very strong woman, but also was still approachable and relaxed and able to have a conversation with. Now we have two stops left on your time with us today, but this next stop is a very important office we're going to be visiting. And Tess is going to meet you in there to discuss a little bit more about who used that very special space. So she'll see you in there. All right, so we're heading out of the cabinet room now. Notice those very thick doors. And we're continuing down that corridor that we were on before. Just like Tess said, this section of the building was added on in the 1970s, so that's why everything is wooden. It was the trend back then, apparently. But Tess is going to meet us in this special room.
That's right. Hi again, guys. Now, I think you've probably got a good indication of who actually worked here. Everyone, just want to yell it out for me. Who worked in this office? What do you think? Yeah, exactly. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? It looks pretty special. Now, we've got our next true or false for you guys. So, are you ready? Thumbs up, obviously true, thumbs down for false. Our first female Prime Minister, Julie Gillard, worked in this office. True or false? Yeah, well done, senior students. It's an easy one, and well done, guys, too. You know what? It is false. Bob Hawke was the last Prime Minister to work in this office in 1988. Julie Gillard actually worked up the hill at Australian Parliament House in 2010. But it is a very fitting place to stop and reflect on her leadership here in the old Parliament House where the Prime Minister would have worked. Now, Julie Gillard was our 27th Prime Minister, and she passed over an amazing 500 pieces of legislation. Incredible. More than any other run in history. So that's laws, guys. 500 pieces of legislation, laws. Incredible amount. She was a very hard worker and very determined. I've actually got a quote from her, which I'll just read in a moment. What I'm absolutely confident of is, it will be easier for the next woman and the woman after that. And I'm proud of that. Thank you very much. So Julie Gillard there was saying that she paved the way for other women to try and work as a Prime Minister. She said, it's possible, you can do it. And ladies, if you're out there thinking, I might like to go in politics, have a think about it. We haven't had another female Prime Minister since Julie Gillard, so definitely worth you taking a step and thinking about those options. And everybody, think about some kind of characteristics that make a good leader. It's important to consider. Okay, everyone, we're going to head to our last destination, the front steps of the building, and we'll meet Romy there. Let's go now. So heading just to the windows first. And the Prime Minister would have had a fantastic view out there. Going around, very old TV screen there. You can see a picture of Bob Hawke very briefly, our last Prime Minister here. Heading out from the typing pool into the main corridor where you can see the green carpets there and King's Hall, down the stairs and back out the front. Many special events have taken place on these front steps over the years, but you might see some clues as to what Romy's going to be talking about next.
That's right, guys. Welcome back to the front of our building where we started off. But just like I said at the beginning there, not all of the important things and the stories that we can tell happen inside the building. Some of them we can talk about outside here. And it's really, really fitting that we have this amazing thing behind me, which is the tent embassy. Some of you may have heard of this before. It's actually one of Australia's longest running protests. It is a protest. It started in 1972 and is still going today. Now, some of the people that we've spoken about so far on your trip with us today came into politics for various different reasons, but some of them came in to really want to make change. A couple of the women that really definitely did that were the Indigenous women that we had in our parliament, specifically the firsts that we've had. So we had our very first female Indigenous senator, Nova Peris, representing the Northern Territory, who you can see there. And then we also have our very first female member of the House of Representatives, Linda Burney, who represented the electorate of Barton in New South Wales. Now, Linda Burney is still in Parliament, still representing her electorate there. But both of these women had a really big desire to make a difference and make change for the First Peoples that they represented. And Linda's challenge of let's make history was definitely achieved, not just by these women entering Parliament, which was a big first in and of itself, but also by them really wanting to champion and make change for those people that they represented. Now, both Nova and Linda, just by breaking through, made lots of changes, but they also encouraged the next generation of Indigenous women and women in general to enter Parliament and show that it doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is, that you have a place in Parliament and you should be able to be represented. Isn't that right, Tess?
Yeah, that's right. Well said, Romy. So we've gone on quite a journey today, guys. We've gone through a few different spaces in our beautiful museum, but there are so many more stories to explore. We've got a great online exhibition, really, and called Breaking Through 75 Years of Women in Parliament, and I really encourage you to have a look at that one. There's lots of other resources to look at as well up there. Guys, you've been fantastic. Do we have time for any questions?
I think before we take questions, though, I'm wondering, because we'll see whether we can do that one. But first, we will take some questions. If anyone has any questions about the building or about anything we've spoken about today.
Any of the people we've talked about? If you do have some later on, you can contact us. No worries, guys. You've been, do we have any? I don't think so. That's okay. We'll move on. Guys, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking part today. Like I said, we've only explored a few stories and there is lots more to talk about. And yeah, I'd encourage you to do some research. So I think we can burst the bubble of what we've been doing, guys. Yeah. We have a special treat for you. We're going to...
We've lied, unfortunately. We haven't run around this building with a camera. That would be a bit crazy. It's a what?
Oh,
you ruined my surprise, guys. Whatever. But yes, we are in a studio here and we have our green screen and our wonderful producer, Tim, who makes all of the magic happen. We just stand here and say words. Yep. But
thanks,
yes.
guys. It's been wonderful. And like I said, feel free to look at our website. That's great.
And if you can think up any questions that you would like to know, feel free to tell your teachers and they can email us and we'll do our very best to get back to you with those answers. So thank you guys so much for coming and spending the last half an hour with us. You've been wonderful groups and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys. Much appreciated. Bye.
Okay. Thank you for that.